And welcome everyone to our weekly call as ever. I hope you're all thriving. Let me just share my screen to give you all a reminder of our agenda for the call today.
It was like this dancers, and then they were like
which I've just done. In terms of our agenda today, yeah, that's it. That's working. In a second, I'll hand over to Tiru, who's kindly joined us. He's one of the co-authors of the DNS resolver information internet draft, which is, unless he tells me differently, I believe currently in working group last call. So Tiru can sort of talk about that, and then as always I'll rattle through some sort of recent sort of news headlines, forthcoming events, etc. And we should have time at the end for any other business, any news anyone wants to share, anything else anyone wants to highlight, etc. As always. Without further ado, Tiru, as I say, a co-author of the DNS resolver information draft, which, as I say, I believe is currently in last call, and it provides a mechanism for resolvers to provide information. If I just find the intro, yeah, just give information about themselves to clients, which I thought was an interesting, because that was part of the ADD charter. For those of you that cast your mind back to when we formed the ADD working group in the IETF, gosh, 3 years ago, I guess now, which is quite scary as well. So it was good to see the resolver information come through. See, Chris is telling me it passed last call last week. So anyway, I thought it was an interesting draft. Good to see it addressing one of the missing component in the charter. So hence I invited Tiru and Med to talk about the draft and then just take any questions. So if I stop sharing, so Tiru can, if he wishes, and hand over Tiru to you just to sort of give your take on the draft and anything else you want to talk about.
Sure. I'll just share my screen just a second.
Surely.
See the slides?
Yep, that's worked.
Okay. Hello everyone, I'm Tiru. I'm from Nokia. I think we started writing, probably we've published the first version of this draft almost 3 to 4 years back. I think many of the audience are aware of the work happening in adaptive DNS discovery working group at IETF. The working group has concluded on 2 primary mechanisms for discovering encrypted DNS servers, which are hosted by the network. One is based on, one is DNR, which is based on DHCP and routing advertisement. The other one, GDR, is based on DNS itself, which uses a special domain name. However, the problem with these 2 techniques, or rather, I would say one of the limitations is that the client does not know what are the capabilities of the DNS resolver, and this was one such functionality that was missing and that was supposed to be provided. So the AD working group charter had one of the milestones, which is for a mechanism to provide a mechanism where clients could learn the DNS resolver information, which could later be used for selection purposes. The policy of a client to select a particular DNS resolver is outside the scope, but what is in scope was to provide whatever DNS resolver's capabilities are back to the client so that it can make a choice on how to leverage that for its selection purposes. So what we did was to fill that gap. We introduced a new resource record type by name res resolver info. It's used in two ways. Basically, if you are using the DNR-based discovery mechanism, then the client would use the authentication domain name, which would be discovered using DNR, and then use that to query the ADN and then discover the resolver capabilities. Whereas if the client is using DDR, then it would use the special SUDN resolver.arpa to discover the resolver capabilities. The resolver information is a very simple key pair, key value pair, so that we have defined an INR registry. So what we have done in the draft is we have defined certain key value pairs as initial INR registry, and that acts as a template for any future specification to add new key value pairs in the future. As I've just previously said, the retrieved information can help with the server selection, but it's implementation specific and outside the scope of the working group charter. It uses very similar encoding. It uses I would say, the same encoding rules and verifications as in DNS service discovery, and it uses the key value syntax. Yeah, there are two mechanisms to retrieve the DNS resolver information. We provided two mechanisms to make sure that the DNS resolver information is authentic and not being tampered upon. So one easy way is establish the encrypted connection with the discovered resolver and then retrieve the resolver information. The other approach could be that if the client has enabled local DNSSEC validation, then it could first retrieve use resolver info to query and get the resolver information, and then later establish an encrypted connection. So the client has a choice depending on if it has DNSSEC enabled, then it can try the later option. Otherwise, it can pick the first option. So I mean, we had several attributes when we had published the draft, but then the consensus in the working group, the broad consensus at least, was that we agreed on these three key value pairs. One is whether the DNS server supports QNAME minimization or not, and the other one is the support of extended DNS error codes. Extended DNS error codes gives the client flexibility of knowing why there was a DNS error, and that can be used for instance, making informed decision to the end user to know why the DNS request was not being served. And another key value pair is an URL that points to a generic constructed resolver information for troubleshooting purposes. It could point out to the, for instance, the DOH server, how to report an error with this DOH server back to the admin, how to raise complaints, what kind of DNS DOH APIs are being supported. So that URL would serve any such interesting information for troubleshooting purposes. That's it. It's a very simple draft, but it took quite some time to make progress. But I'm glad that it has just crossed the first hurdle of working group last call, and I'm hoping by the end of this year we should have an RFC out of this. Any questions on this?
Well, yeah, so if anyone's got any questions, as always, pop in the chat if that's easiest, or raise your virtual hand, or just unmute if that's too difficult, and we'll take those. And whilst people are thinking, I think a couple from me, Tiru. Did you get any sort of feedback through the last call?
No, we did not get. I haven't seen any comments during the working group last call.
Me neither. I was just curious in case I missed anything. I don't recall seeing anything on the mailing list.
Tommy Jensen is document shepherding it, so he just sent me a few minor comments, but nothing much changes in the draft. So, yeah.
And any indication of implementation support at this very early stage?
I have heard a couple of people implementing it. In fact, the key value pair was a suggestion that came out of it. Earlier, we were using JSON formatting, and there was, I don't recollect the name, but there were comments that they would prefer DNSSD, so that both on the storage as well as on the wire, we would have similar formatting, and JSON was not preferred. So that's how we changed the formatting to use DNSSD instead of JSON. So I'm aware there are a couple of implementations, but I don't recollect who implemented those, but I can check it.
Okay, which is impressive at this early stage, to be fair. Only just completing last call. Peter, I see you've got your hand raised.
Hi, yeah, is now the have you finished, Tiru? Sorry, was there more to your...
No, that's the last slide. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I didn't want to jump in if there were too many, if you were just pausing for questions for this stuff so far. Yeah, I was curious about like if there had been any discussion about adding some sort of like, I mean, this is like feature flag support with QName minimization and things like this, but are there any other features that were discussed that might go into this, or was it kind of like a minimum?
No, this is what the at least within the working group, there was consensus to agree on these parameters. But we also had a good discussion on the INR registry for this. So how new key value pairs could be added in the future. So we have a detailed section on how new specifications can easily write up and add new parameters to this registry that is getting created. So that way, the whole idea is this is easily extendable. So if we see a need to add more parameters, we can easily add that in the future.
And so I was thinking in particular about things that are like experimental features of DNS that maybe historically went into like, I don't know, text records or EDNS fields or something like that. I think something like the X prefix for HTTP headers.
Got it.
Do you know
Yeah, I think there was a discussion around that. I need to check if we had a policy where we could have private or experimental ones added, but I don't recollect what was done on that, but I will check and see what was.
As I say, I think this is a really good,
You've gone on mute, Peter, impressively.
Oh, God, sorry. It's technology. I was saying that I think this is a really good standard or proposed standard, and or whatever the RFC is, not standard, but you know, thing. And I think it would be really useful in the future for DNS resolvers and the clients to be able to figure out what's actually available and things like this. So yeah, really good. Like kudos for all the work you've done on this.
I just looked into the spec, so it was. It's mandatory to have a specification required. I think expert review was not agreed upon, so we have to follow the specification required policy for the registration procedure for new values to be added. But if you are trying to do an experimentation, then temp hyphen is a mechanism that could be used instead of picking hex hyphen. We picked temporary hyphen just to indicate that these are temporary and experimental values.
Well, that's interesting because Patrick said on chat that the X prefix for HTTP has been deemed harmful, and there's an RFC, which I did, maybe I've heard about, that is deprecating the X prefix and similar constructs in application protocols. Does DNS count as an application protocol? I'm sure it does, but yeah, okay. Well, thank you. I was just curious. Thank you very much.
And impressive knowledge, Patrick, just to sort of pick up on that. So helpful. You have sort of community notes live whilst we're talking. Always a good thing. Yeah, thanks for that, Peter. Anyone else got questions for Tiru? Good chance to do so. Chris, do you want to unmute? Chris?
Yeah, double muted. Hello. Hi, everyone. First of all, thanks to Tiru for presenting this. And yes, it is, has been in the works for a while. I wanted to follow up on the question of where this is implemented. Specifically, I wanted to ask if you're aware of any client implementations.
I'm only aware of the DNS server-side implementation. I have not seen any client-side implementation yet.
Yeah, because that's the big question mark in my mind is as with many of these things, it's a bit chicken and egg. And why would you write a serverless implementation if there are no clients that are going to query it? And likewise, why would the clients write it if they're not if there isn't widespread server deployment, and also B, which is possibly an easier question to ask, is what would they do with the results? And if we're talking about Q&A minimization, I personally think that's useful information for a client to know, okay, this is a route that does make some effort to reduce leakage of unnecessary information. And the extended DNS error is also, I would think, useful for clients to know that that is going to be supported by the resolver. And of course, this is completely extensible, but I was kind of hoping that in the last call comments, we would have at least something that indicated that, but yeah, I guess we're not there yet.
Tempted. Perhaps after this, I'll post a comment to the ADD mailing list to ask if anyone is implementing on either client side or indeed server side and wishes to say so. That would be really useful to know.
Yeah, so one of the interests that we had at least was the structured error responses back to the client. We were extending EDE so that if a domain name gets filtered, you would know more details on why the domain was blocked. And with HTTPS, since we don't get any error pages now, this would actually help to give error pages back. So there's another working group draft. We can talk about it in the next session. But that draft is relying on the resolver info. It basically addresses an attack scenario where let's say your proxy or forwarder is not aware of this extension, and somebody puts those EDE extension codes, then you would know that, hey, my resolver does not support this, and I'm getting this basically spoofed or injected by someone else in the upstream, right? So what I've seen is client implementations like Apple and others have already started implementing that specification. And I know like Akamai is implemented the DNS server part of it, but I'm like asking them that attack vector we have not yet seen, that probably once they want to enroll it, they have to deploy this eventually. If we believe wherever these deployments, if that attack is going to be prevalent, then this is the only mitigation that is available to prevent that attack. So it's also useful for other use cases, not just for selections, but also identify some sort of attacks, injection attacks.
Yeah. Good point. Good answer. Good question. So, yeah, just underlining that the value of this, which is helpful. Whilst you've been talking, I see Mark, you've had your hand raised for a couple of minutes, waiting patiently. Do you want to come in with a question?
Yes, it's actually more of a response to Chris from BT. It's Mark from the DNS Research Federation here. And just to say that we've been engaged in some passive DNS resolver testing work with ICANN recently, where we've been measuring actually, the feature support for different resolvers using a sort of centralized service for doing that. And actually, in response to the specific points about client interest in this stuff, I think that client interest is potentially extremely high based on the work that we've been doing on a sort of passive basis. Actually, if you could instead go out actively as e.g. a big brand and actually look at the big resolvers on the market and look at their support and actually test servers in a way that's being described here and actually query them for their support for different features. I think that's an extremely exciting opportunity for the industry, because actually we all know that if relying upon passive data is never going to give you as much coverage as going out and getting things actively. So I think there's a real use case there. I'm excited as well just to add people's discussion about the support for more features. I think it'd be great if we could have some DNSSEC testing support in there built in. You could have some IPv6 testing support built in as part of the spec as well. All those things would be great. But I think it's a really, really great start, and I'm very excited about this RFC. So just a comment really, but thank you. And thanks very much, Tiru, for an excellent presentation to us today.
Thanks, Mark.
Yeah,
Gosh.
I can definitely see that would be useful in terms of surveying the resolver estate. Yeah, but obviously better to get an explicit answer than to have to try and infer feature support. You mentioned a couple of other things that would be useful to include in this IANA registry. I was wondering whether is it worth starting a discussion on whether it should be included as entries in this draft? Or would you see that as a follow-up? Yeah, things like so.
Is that, Chris, is that question directed at Tiru or Mark or
Mark.
So could you repeat the question? I just missed the last bit of that.
Okay, so
Yeah.
in your answer, you mentioned a couple of additional bits of resolver information that you
Yes.
think it would be useful to add. So my question is, would it be an opportune time to get those inserted into Tiru's draft before it's published?
I think so. I mean, in terms of the context for us, we've been tasked with, I guess 6 tests, which I can define for us in our passive work, which cover a wider spectrum than, I mean, QNAME minimization is one of them, and that's a really important one at the moment. Interestingly, that one is surprising in the way in which it's being influenced and not being influenced by big players at the moment. So it's a really good one for this kind of testing. I think also, but definitely some of the more core stuff, DNSSEC is a really good example. IPv6 is another one that's quite basic, but would be good to be able to test that support in a very ready way. So I think there's a number of ones that we could that could be added in at this stage. And I'd also, I guess, a question back to Tiru is where this initial set came from in terms of the identified set, and the basis for the choice of those particular ones versus more general ones as well. So that's probably my response to that.
Yeah, Mark. I mean, like, is the draft just cleared the working group last call, but I think it's Tommy Jensen is still working on the document shared write-up. So if you think that there are strong attributes that you think should be added to this spec, I think it's the right time. I think I would suggest that you raise those comments in the working group list, and if we see no major objections, we could easily add that and update the draft. So I'm like open to anything which would help the client implementations, if that would help in selection process in any way, and if you are missing any attributes, I'm looking for feedback on the working group mailing list, and I'm open to updating the draft.
Thank you. That's great.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Brett, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, I was just going to add my support, really. I think adding those extra attributes in is something you should probably look at doing now rather than postponing for later. I think if we go back to the earlier part of the conversation about it being a kind of chicken and egg situation about implementing clients and servers, I think the more attributes you can add into there, the more information you can reveal about a resolver to make troubleshooting for DNS administrators easier. I think that goes some way to making it more useful, and therefore we should be looking at that sooner rather than later. And the obvious next step to that is adding some kind of authoritative server information onto it as well, so you can get information about what the authoritative server is able to provide as well. But probably don't want to cloud it with that right now, because I guess that would potentially add in a significant extra time frame. So that probably wants to be a future thing. But I think certainly adding those extra attributes in that the previous comments I mentioned now would be better than postponing for later, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, I agree. That makes sense to me, because I think we have the implementations and DNR and DDR deployments have just started happening. So I think we have, I think we can spend another probably a month or second working group last call, which would last for another couple of weeks. But I think posting those comments and updating the draft, I think at this point of time would be the right thing. If these attributes can enhance troubleshooting or other selection purposes for the clients. So I'm open to any such attributes and discussion in the working group list.
Just putting, if you bear with me a moment, Tommy's email. So just to interject, since Terry mentioned Tommy Jensen as the document shepherd, I've just popped a link, Tommy's email address, which I've got from the information provided with the draft. So that's his email address for the purposes of his document shepherd role, I presume, that's attached to the draft. And I'll also put, just for completeness, in case anyone doesn't have it, a link to the sort of draft itself, just so you can sort of easily access that if you haven't already done so. Sorry, someone was trying to come in. I'm not sure who it was.
There's me. I asked a question in the chat, but I thought I might ask it in person instead. So if there's going to be an IANA registry for the features or the keys that are supported for the different features, forgive me if I missed this, if it was already explained, but what's the process for updating that registry? Will future RFCs be needed, or like, so let's say the RFC passes as is, and you know, with the features that have been listed.
So the procedure required is specification required. Specification required doesn't really mean that you would need an RFC. Basically, I think as long as I believe you could have some stable document, even if it's an individual submission, right? I think it could clear that hurdle, is my understanding of that specification required section. I'm just opening that just to check if my understanding is right or wrong, but
okay, so
yeah.
If there was a future RFCs for all DNS servers must be pink, and if that RFC said this feature will be supported via this key, that would be enough.
Right. So it could be an individual submission. It does not have to go through the. It could be an individual submission that you would submit. It will go through the ICE reviews, and the working group will probably see if it's not conflicting. The ISEC and others would review if it does not conflict with the charter of AD, and if it just complements it and does not create any major conflicts. I think we could take various paths. It need not be a proposed standard. It just needs to be a stable specification, and it could be an independent submission.
One last question that I just thought of is I probably should know the answer to this, but where will the IANA registry be? Is it like a web page that we can go and look at to see what the features?
Yes, it will be a web page that's maintained by IANA, and all the new values will be updated there.
I muted.
See, Kathleen's put a comment in the chat, which, Kathleen, would you mind just elaborating on that? If he's correct on specification required, do you mean that Tiru is correct in his earlier comment, or somebody
specification
else?
Yeah, specification required doesn't have to be a standards track RFC. It could just be it may not even have to be a published one. A draft might even qualify. You'd have to look up to see if I'm correct on that, because it's been a few years since I've been in AD, but yeah, just a draft at least.
Cool, thanks.
Or it could be in a different standards body, I believe. I don't think it even has to be an IETF.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Thank you. If we're finished on that point, which I then interrupted, Michael, did you want to come in with a question or comment?
Yeah, just a real quick question regarding the IANA registry and what gets added or doesn't add it. I'm just concerned about what happens if there is kind of a dispute. This is the lawyer in me. Someone says this should be added. Someone says it shouldn't be added. And then instead of IANA just executing in a ministerial or an administrative function, so what are the mechanisms when there's potentially a dispute? IANA generally likes to defer to someone or some organization to make those tough calls. And what is the current insight into that? I guess that's my question.
At least so what I have seen for specification required, at least in my experience, is that usually the working group if it's an active working group, members in that working group review the ask for the new INR registry. And if there is no big concern with adding that attribute, right? You typically, it's very easy to add new attributes. I mean, unless you are adding something very controversial or something which invades the privacy of the end user in some way, or something which is contentious. If it's like a simple parameter which would help in troubleshooting and does not have any such contentious issues, I think the working group members would say, yeah, they have no issues, and it would be very easy for you to add new INR entries. It's imagine specification required as something which is experts basically review the request. Experts are the working group members eventually who are active in the add working group. And then the additional requirement, like I was saying, that it has to be a stable document. Either it's a stable document at IETF, or it could be a stable document in 3GPP specifications or some other standard body. And as long as it's a stable document, right, it could be added to INR. So that's the only additional requirement. But an expert review is mandatory nevertheless. So the only two policies that I am aware, at least at IETF, for expert review and specification required. And specification review is expert review plus a stable document.
And again, whilst we've been talking, Chris has helpfully put a link to the RFC on specifications required. So anyone interested in digging down into that, no doubt that will be covered in more detail in the RFC 8126. So yeah, thanks for digging that out. Interesting questions. Good knowledge, Tiru, as well. Most impressive.
Hey, thanks, Andrew.
Anyone else got any questions for Tiru or other comments? Not seeing any hands raised. Can't see any other comments in the chat currently. Fantastic. All right, well, let's sort of move on there then. So Tiru, thank you for coming on to talk about that, especially as I haven't had a chance to check, but I suspect it's a reasonably antisocial hour for you, assuming you're calling in from home somewhere. So sort of double thanks for doing that. And in case you don't want to stay on for the rest of the call, hopefully you'll be able to join the next IETF meeting in Prague, because I know there were sort of visa problems from India to the US. So
yes, really my visa had expired, and I got an appointment in 2024, but perhaps it shouldn't be a problem. So yeah, so I'm hoping that I'll get my visa.
Yes. Which would be a good thing, and possibly even, since Michael's mentioned Da Nang, I don't know if you're planning to go to Vietnam for the DNS symposium, OARC, etc., but that'd be a relatively short trip for you, or even to join remotely wouldn't be so terrible in terms of time zone differences.
Yeah.
But Anyway, as I say, thank you for that. You're welcome to stay on, but if you don't, given the sort of the late hour, completely understand. But really useful
Sure.
discussion.
Thanks, Andrew, for inviting me to the meeting. And I would love to talk about the other work that we are doing on delegated credentials for basically endpoints to authenticate to DNS forwarders using PKI-based certs. So how we tried that and the challenges that we faced and how we are planning to leverage delegated credentials. And if that work interests anyone, I would like to hear feedback.
Right. Okay. I'll make a note of that. And come back to you there. Brilliant. Right. If you wouldn't mind unsharing your screen, Tiru, that will be really helpful.
Yeah, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Fantastic. Thank you. Okay. Well, I hope everyone found that useful, and as I say, really good to see that progressing, given it was the missing strand of the ADD working group charter being fulfilled, which is good to see. Right, so let me then continue with the agenda. So if I press the right button. Okay, so I've reshared my screen. I'm just going to sort of just highlight some recent developments amongst other things. As per usual, and then we will have time at the end for any other business, so any other news, etc., that anyone wants to sort of bring up. So I'll just call out a few of these. As always, I won't go through all of them. You should have this in your inbox from the sort of weekly headlines email. If you haven't and want it, drop me a message afterwards or put something in the chat and I'll pick it up and add you to the mailing list. Things that caught my eye, well, firstly, because I hadn't seen anything at all about it previously, ICANN has now published some more details about the DNS abuse day, which is day one of the sort of 4 days of DNS related activity in Vietnam on the first week of September. So the agenda for the DNS abuse day is now available, link as per the screen. Other things, as I say, I just cherry pick a couple of things. Third one down, it just made me laugh to see that there was a sort of problem with Hotmail, which inevitably was the DNS, just because it always is, as you will be familiar with. Then a few malware related things which I won't go through, but I will highlight some work that the DNS Research Federation has done, just looking at subdomain providers as a mechanism to launch phishing attacks, but not so much to launch for malware, which I thought was interesting. So that's a post on the Research Federation site, which you can link to read at your leisure. As I say, various other things there, which I won't just go through them all because it take too long. And then other stuff, not specifically DNS related, that caught my eye. Again, I won't go through all of these, but yeah, that was an interesting article on Politico, second one down, about tech lobbying, the tech sector lobbying against state privacy laws. I think the tech sector, I think collectively being the biggest sort of paying lobbyist group in both North America and Europe, I believe. So not really surprising to see that. And then inevitably there's a few AI related things. So you'll see one there from Politico, another one from DNS Filter, and so on. So again, they may be of interest to you. looking at calls for papers, workshop proposals. Just a reminder, if you wish to put forward any presentations for NANOG, the deadline is imminent, next Monday, 28th August, for proposals, and then a couple of days later, Emily came on last week to talk briefly about this. The sort of DNS Research Federation have got a call for papers, but basically with funding available to continue with work in particular areas. So there's sort of about a week and a half to go for submission of any papers. So that's of interest to you or your organisation. Just a reminder that's coming up also relatively soon, so not to miss that. And as I think Emily said last week, they'd already seen a lot of interest in this area, which is good to know. And then we've got sort of various events coming up, including as recently tomorrow for a London Domain Name Summit, Tuesday and Wednesday of this week. I've mentioned the Vietnam events, which are only a couple of weeks' time now. So DNS Abuse, followed by the DNS Symposium, followed by DNS OARC, all back to back. In the same hotel in Vietnam. The only other one I'll mention specifically, IETF 118 in Prague in November. It was due to open for registration last week. There were some last minute sort of delays just getting the VAT registration sorted. So registration should open at some point this week. And a reminder that the sort of early bird rate will be available if you book relatively promptly. So if you're thinking of going, there is an advantage from registering early if you remember to do so. And I think, oh yeah, finally from me, I haven't finalised this for next week, but I tried to do this for last week, but it didn't work out. I will see if I can get someone on from ICANN to talk about the sort of those first 2 days of events in a couple of weeks' time. So if I can, then I'll get them to just talk through the main agenda items for the DNS Abuse Day and the DNS Symposium as well. Just so you've got a heads up on those two to complement the discussion we had last week on the OARC meeting. So as soon as that's confirmed, I'll probably push out an email so people are aware. We won't then do a call on the 4th of September, mainly because of the clash with those various events. So, but we'll be back as sort of normal on the 11th. So I think that is now it from me. So we're on any other business, so I'll stop sharing. Bit of a rapid run through there, but I thought I'd just there's nothing really major news wise this week, so I'll just pause to see if anyone has got anything else that you wish to sort of talk about, comment on, share, etc. this week. So very much on any other business if anyone has any. If you do, as before, pop it in the chat if that's easier. Just raise your virtual hand and sort of take the chance to share as appropriate. Give me a moment or two to do that if you wish. One thing I'll mention just while you're thinking, which I'd forgot about the news headlines, which Pascal highlighted within the last week. There was a story in the finance sector about more fines being levied from people that organisations that weren't able to provide a complete sort of log of inbound and outbound communications, which is a compliance requirement in parts of the finance sector. I think the fines totaled something like $500 million or so. So very much a topic of interest to CISOs, I think, in regulated sectors in terms of encryption and what enterprises can or can't see that's traversing their networks. But I will put the link out in the headlines next week if you're interested in seeing that. So Anyone else got anything that you want to raise this week? I'm not seeing anything in the chat. I can't see any hands raised. So I'm taking it that's not the case. In which case, have a fantastic week, everyone. I'll confirm as soon as I can if we're going to talk about the ICANN stuff next Monday, and look forward to catching up with everyone then. So have a great week. Speak to you all then.
Have a good week. Bye.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thanks very much.